to me, AI was a medium average Steven Spielberg movie, which I didn't quite understand. Um, I, Haley Joel Osment, I forgot who the little kid was, but it's now a trigger word.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action. Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, joined today by my guest, Nick Cawthon. Now, Nick is very much an intellectual and an expert in his field. He is a researcher. He's a user interface expert. He knows a lot about AI. Did I miss anything, Nick?
No, those are all true.
Anything I mentioned that I can tell the audience about that's a giant bold-faced lie for you?
No, two out of the three things are true. I'm not going to tell which one is true and which one's a lie.
Well,
but I appreciate the intro.
yeah, I think we can figure out which one's the lie, if any of them are, as we go through our conversation, right? So why don't you start by kind of telling the audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit more about the expertise you carry in those three areas?
Trevor, I'm interested about you. Why are you so disgruntled, and what can we do to help you get back to being gruntled? Where's the conflict coming from? And from that, I might be able to spin off a little bit about my background and my story.
Well, the show and the title came from I've been a project manager for almost 15 years now, and every PM I talk to, we are all somewhat disgruntled because of a variety of reasons, but the biggest one being nobody knows what we actually do. People think that we just check off task lists and hand out assignments and that's it. And you of all people should know that is not what a good project manager does.
I agree. I just come off a project where it's been a couple years, but it was this muscle memory, and I'll use that as the background or the origin story, where the PM used the phrase "I'm not a designer, but." And I've had that happen dozens of times where you're working alongside engineers and PMs and you're all trying to, get to a place of implementation. And the PM feels like they need to jump into Figma or Visio or Sketch or any of these drawing applications that they've been in the past. And it's always met with empathy and patience. And again, you kind of feel as if the reverse would never be true, where I wouldn't go into a requirements document and start banging out bullet points and caveat that with, I'm not a PM, but I think I know how this should work. And so it's the gap between design and development is where I'd love to cover today. This project also was unique in the fact that I had been with this client 18 months prior, done this huge Figma deliverable click-throughs, wonderful in its intricacy and its complexity, but horrible in terms of judging the likelihood it would ever be implemented. The internal tools team that was responsible for building it didn't have the budget or the time or the priority or even the aptitude to build it. And so when I came back to this client a second time, I saw that it had been dropped on the floor. And I said that we're not going to do this again. We're not going to over design something because it can't be engineered. And this was also at the time that these generative tools allowed us to take an existing code component library and use that as our building block. So rather than a design system library in Figma, in a drawing application, which needed to go through the review cycles from design operations and then put into the queue for the front end team to implement, we started at the finish. We started with the code components and then built ourselves a development environment as designers that abided by the React version and the Tailwind version and didn't install any dependencies and libraries, and that we were able to use and reference existing components to create pages and workflows and error states and conditions and handling, and the whole thing was fed by a Google Sheets, quote, database, and use that as a prototyping tool, as a way to make sure that the product requirements were met, make sure that the user experience was what our intended users expected. And we eschewed the internal design department and jumped right to the finish. And so, as we talk about these sort of traditional gaps, and I poke fun at RPMs, I would imagine they would be going into those same kind of tools to say, I'm not a designer, but I can prompt together something that it's exactly what I want to see. There's no gap between learning how to use a design software now and being able to see something that moves and feels like the web. And the opposite is true, is that there's no gap between a designer going in and feeling like they can be a front end engineer with enough constraint and knowledge to know that they're not too far from a launchable version of code. So, as a disgruntled PM, I'd love to hear about how you process and organize and which boxes go to which people and how you determine what's checked and what's not.
Well, you covered a lot of ground there in the very beginning. I think that's enough just to be able to discuss and break down everything you just talked about in the whole episode.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go. Let's
So,
go deep.
so let's start with what is you mentioned using the tool Figma a lot. I don't know how much of my audience is familiar with that. So why don't you explain what that is and does first?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take you way back. The first wireframes I saw of sort of drawings to abstract what a web experience could be like were done in PowerPoint. 640 by 480. You'd have to go to the next slide to quote scroll down the page. But PowerPoint did have the ability to put in Visual Basic components, and you could do things like drop downs and radio buttons and click navigations, and you could sort of show hierarchy and typography and balance of a page through drawing software. And these tools got better and better over time. They began to form a niche unto themselves, where us, quote, UI designers, and we'll go into the differences between UI and UX at some point during this show, but us UI designers got more and more sophisticated in these design application, in these drawing tools. And Figma has been the one to take the crown the most recent, as well as being the most specialized and targeted towards design systems, which is a pattern library for which all components of a website or a company's brand will reference and map back to. It's not great at interaction and prototyping, which is somebody who is concerned about the experience and the flow. That's a very high priority to me, to be able to have somebody move through a complex process, not just see storyboards of it. But Figma recently went public at a X billion IPO, and is really sort of the de facto design tools for those who want to work on digital products. So that's again, and I will never use it ever again. It's just kind of odd that it went from such widespread acceptance to now I'm questioning the very ethos of working in design tools as something to hand off. I would rather work in code and use the code to generate the abstractions of design than vice versa, handing over something that has to be manually coded because the integrations between a design tool and a front end code repository are still very basic and in an alpha state. So why not work in the code rather than um, work in the abstraction of a drawing tool? So yeah, that's Figma in a nutshell. It's a UI tool, which I see is now hopelessly obsolete.
Wow. And I just found out about it probably a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have just in the 8 minutes we've been recording, you have skillfully and artfully demonstrated why I use my favorite phrase in most project meetings. And that is I tell people I am the dumbest person in the room because
Right.
as you've clearly stated, I understood about half of what you've said today.
Caffeinated, I'm showered, and I'm ready, Trevor. Let's define. Let's go from unknown to known.
So let's start with what is the difference between a user interface and or UI and UX?
Great question. One that is commonly asked. Um, they're very much related. But there was this notion back maybe 10 or 15 years ago of Apple products of they just work, where you have the difference between, let's say, a BlackBerry or installing a Oracle database on a CD, and then the cognitive load required to complete your task was extremely high. We had this, um, I want to say, ethos or mantra or allure of enterprise scale products needed to reject the notion of being aesthetically pleasing because, like a Russian tank, if it looked nice, it probably didn't work as well as we wanted it to engineering wise. It was, built to last and scale. But with Apple products, we started to understand that there was an aesthetic and there was a reduction of information at every given step, and that we could make the experience of something that would be easy to use pleasurable. It didn't have to be an arduous task. And this notion of a UX also started to look at all the different factors involved. It's now sort of broader than just the digital product, but think about when you buy an Apple product at the store and you open the box and the presentation, the follow up of how was your shopping experience. That's now a service design approach of the different elements of experience along the way. It, I've got another one for you. It's often used, but I will replay it again. With Uber or ride sharing, we were taught all of our lives not to get into cars with strangers, lest we be whisked away uh, to random places. But around 2008, there was this notion of ride sharing, which was foreign to many people. To be able to press a button and get into a car and get taken to where you go, because there was no licensing at the time. All you needed was an app in a car, and you could kidnap to your heart's content. But if you think about the experience of somebody calling a taxi cab, where you had to get on the phone and maybe the dispatcher would pick up. Sometimes you had to call 2 or 3 times. The dispatcher's English wasn't always great. The time in which they conveyed for you to be picked up at a spot that you weren't sure you conveyed correctly on the corner of Main and Broadway, like that sort of transferal information was always so hazy at best. And the alternative wasn't great either, where you'd have to stand on the corner and wave your arm in the air, signaling to the community around you that I don't have a ride. I need to get someplace, and God forbid it's raining. And so those sort of experience were very humiliating in terms of a taxi cab. Now, say what you will about the company, its trajectory, and its ethics. What Uber did was help address the vulnerabilities of that experience. Because if you remember, the first time you'd open up the app, you saw this animation of little cabs all driving around you, which was fake, by the way. Those cabs still aren't real. But from an experience standpoint, what that gave you was confirmation that, oh, they're all around me. There's other people doing this. I'm not the only one that thinks this is crazy, but I'll do it anyways. So it reduced that barrier, that apprehension to think that I'm going to be the only one using this service and I'm going to be taken to places near and far. And it also gave you this feeling of like, oh, there's one right around the corner from me. When I hit click buy, it's going to pick me up. And I have this sort of quantified distance of how long that will take. Now, once you hit reserve the cab, they all vanished and it told you how long it'd take. But that was a nice marriage of a UI element and a user experience element. The experience sort of dealt with all the emotions of its intended user and then gave you alleviations along the way to help you sort of get through from a frictionless standpoint. So UI and UX, the different steps, how easy and intuitive they are, how do we break up information into digestible chunks, and the UI can be the polish and the design and the consistency around the different elements of the interface. So long answer, short question. Thank you for letting me go down that trip down memory lane.
So I want to pull off a little bit on that because, you brought up the whole Apple experience, and I'm an Apple user personally,
Mhm.
but I remember getting an Android phone. And when you compare the two side by side, they both do the same things technically.
Yeah.
One is designed for me to want to use it without having to have a lot of education, a lot of background, a lot of knowledge. The other one is almost designed for the people like you who want to dig into it, want to know about it, want to make it sing and dance for you. Whereas I'm over here just going, I need to get this app, I need to make it work. And neither one is a right answer, but it's almost like an exercise in the exact thing that you're talking about how the experience can be the experience can make or break a great interface.
If we think about ChatGPT, which I'm sure we've all tried, in the last couple months, they've started to put in references. But when these tools launched, you got answers and you had no idea how
Mhm.
those answers were derived. And now there was sort of comments of plagiarism, intellectual property theft. And when you're now getting an answer, you have references and you're linking back to that. And that improves the experience because those sort of reluctancy, A, to believe what the blinking cursor tells us, and B, to trust that it's a product for good, not evil, were elements of the experience that early on you had to either be in on or not. Um, and if I'm trying to get my favorite cocktail recipe, maybe that's not something that I need attribution and references for. But if I'm going to be using it for more intellectual tasks, I certainly need that validation.
Yeah, and sometimes even if you're looking for that drink recipe, there I'll use a personal story here. My dad is he likes Mai Tais,
Hmm.
but he likes a very specific Mai Tai. And if you order a Mai Tai anywhere in the world, you're you could be getting one of 1,000 different recipes.
Yes.
And if he so a lot of the times I have to slump down in my chair when he's sitting there telling the waitress exactly how he wants it made. But, going back to what you were talking about with citations, sometimes seeing the citation is the difference in understanding is that where the Caesar salad was created or the buffalo wing or some of that
Mm,
stuff because there's mythology and then there's truth. And the way we tell stories, sometimes the mythology becomes the truth rather than the actual truth.
yes. It was Julius Caesar, I believed. When he visited Tijuana, he created the Caesar salad.
Exactly.
Julio Caesar was his name.
On
Now,
Revolution Street.
Trevor, did you answer my question on the division of labor when we're all in the same tool set? When we all use the same tools, how do we best delineate or encourage the PM to say, I'm not a designer, but look what I created? How does that collaboration occur? Because I think these walls are coming down along with the tools that are changing.
Well, first of all, in my professional opinion, if a PM says, I'm not a designer, but, and then finishes that sentence with anything other than, I want the opinion of the designers, that PM needs to be taken out back and beaten with a stick.
Wow. Wow. You went there very quickly.
Because I, I've famously said project management is its own discipline for a reason. I've spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort becoming a great PM. I
Mhm.
am not a designer. I am not a, any of those other skill sets. So why am I going to be trying to tell the people who are the SMEs that spent their life's work or their recent life's work on how to do this when I brought them here because I want their opinion?
Right.
I may have feedback for them, but I shouldn't be the one telling the team how to do something if it's not my wheelhouse or my area of expertise.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's I think that's a very healthy, other than the beating somebody out back with a stick. I think that's a
Well,
very healthy
metaphorical.
attitude. A metaphorical stick and a
Yes.
metaphorical beating. I struggle with this because it's kind of a mixed blessing. I have a front end engineer that I love working with. We've worked together for 10 years now on a half a dozen different projects, and the gap was always the implementation of my abstraction, where I had designs drawn, and I wanted it to be so intricate and elegant, and I wanted that to be his job of that implementation. But now that I have these tools at my fingertips, I can take the time and create those same experiences to a level where it is shippable code. Yes, it takes an engineer to go through it and make sure that everything is proportioned correctly, and that with his help, I understand the organization and the manner for which I prompt my way to a UX. But that that also comes with a lot of sort of, how should I say, anxiety of, if now the PM can do the exact same thing with, say, a prototype or a wireframe, where does my value lie? What am I bringing into the conversation? And when I mentioned the difference between UI and UX, what the skill set that designers needed to pick up when UX became a field was the ability to do qualitative research, the ability to author and issue and analyze surveys, and to start to bring in the voice of the user, because their designs were no longer a subjective, this is great or this is not. And now their opinions needed to be objective in the voice of the user centric design process, meaning I know based upon what I hear what to design. Before it was just, I want to design it because I think it looks good. And now it's like, no, what is your validation and your research that led you to these design decisions? And so that was a real sort of pivot from UI designers into user experience practitioners, was the ability to incorporate and advocate for research and that humanist experience. But now, yeah, so that's what I'm holding on to is that in our triad of engineer, PM, and designers, there's somebody that's talking about the voice of the user consistently.
Well, let's take a moment to pause. And now, some words from our sponsors.
Projects slipping, teams misaligned, using the wrong tools? Introducing Spec C from Constructive Curiosity, the project execution software built by project managers. Spec C keeps your team aligned, your priorities clear, and progress moving. And right now, join the Spec C beta launch crew to get early access and help shape the future of project management. Sign up today at constructivecuriosity.com. Current PM software not coming through? It's time to see what Spec C can do for you.
Here for me to talk about my Patreon, where every guest that I have, I conduct a post-mortem interview with them, which is about 20 minutes, where I exploit their expertise by giving real-world practical answers. And Nick will be talking about some of his AI expertise, ways to perform research and voice of customer that he's done. And these are all things that you don't get anywhere else because I'm the one doing them. And those are exclusively behind the paywall for those who want to pay a measly $5 a month for the drinking the Kool-Aid tier. There's also a $1 a month tier that is low-hanging fruit. And what that does is that just helps me fund the show. You know, none of this is free. Do this because I enjoy it, but I also am trying to not lose my shirt on the finance side of it. So please subscribe. There's a lot of great interviews and tons of great information in those postmortem interviews. Now, Nick, can we shift the topic to AI?
Let's dip our low hanging fruit in the Kool-Aid.
No, I want to go all the way. So, AI is the hot button topic, and you kind of alluded to how AI can turn one person into doing all three of those tasks.
Yeah.
And I am by no means an AI expert, but I would argue that if one person is using AI to do all three of those tasks, they're doing all three terribly. That's
Yeah. Yeah. Specialization is for insects, right? You want to, the example I used about creating cocktails was not a fake one. When I think about how I use generative tools, I was speaking to a coworker, works for a global company. Um, Job is a little different: business development, revenue generation, relationships. And the context in which this individual uses generative tools is cocktail recipes, like your dad, wanting to find out how to make the best Mai Tai. And I often sort of shake my head to say, this tool is pretty amazing. It is feeling like the feeling that you're riding an electric bicycle. If you remember the first time you ever got on one, this newfound, I'm now a superhuman. It comes with cost. It comes with all sorts of ethical, and we can have an entire show dedicated to what the impact of our adoption of this as a society is and will continue to be. But let's put that aside for now. Um, quite easy to do, but for the sake of this conversation and the audience that is listening, I want to focus on productivity and how it impacts the digital product development and workplace. Um, your comment about all three of those things are not as good. Um, I could never do what I do in those other two. If we're going to say you're using them to do three things, design, PM, and engineering, I can't write requirements documents or do market research. It's not what I've been trained to do. I can't write Python or JavaScript. It's not what I was trained to do. But if I can facilitate just enough of those two to get my ideas across, it does leave me enough time to emphasize on the design and the UX and the prototyping and the things that these generative tools have taken me now to a step where I haven't been able to do it before, in addition to standing up those other two pillars. So it's how you use it. It's the level of knowledge and depth of thought and iteration that you're willing to go through with it. And I love the way that you framed it is you said the first thing you will do is put it in front of a designer and say, what do you think? You're the expert, is to admit you know nothing. And also to admit that you're using these tools and that you're not trying to cheat or hide things, that there's not this sense of you know, I think let me rephrase the statement is amnesty to be able to use these assistants to get you to a point of a deliverable. And that whomever is reading this can ask, how did you do it? And what were your prompts? And what's your process? And how did you go through? And to be able to share and be transparent of like, I'm not trying to pass this off as a Turing test of something that I might have done myself. When you look at the code that I generated or the markets research documents that I generated, it's pretty evident and clear that I didn't write this by hand. But what I want to do is help bring this into our capability set, into our conversation, because I think it's a useful tool if you're wanting to scale and do three times as much. Um, one with an emphasis and two with just a starter, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you that they are a tool, not a crutch.
Mhm.
Meaning that if you have like me as a PM, if I'm working on a software project, I'm going to go to my AI tool of choice and start putting in prompts to create information to be able to speak intelligently to the engineer such as yourself, because when you speak in engineer speak or tech speak,
Right.
and that's not always the same thing I speak in. But at least if I can get my little cheat sheet together to figure out, oh, this is what that means without having to ask you to explain, can you teach me like I'm in kindergarten?
Yeah. Yeah. It I my son is at a performing arts an art school, School of Visual and Performing Arts. And I'm interested to see how from a creative profession, visual artists, performing artists, musicians will or will not use it, because one of the criticisms is that it saps your creativity, is that you now have the answer at your fingertips, so why take that deep dive and iteration and generative thought and synthesizing. That creative process has been sped up. But what is really amazing to me is that there's nobody in the workforce today, whether you're the most senior of senior vice president or the most junior of junior intern, nobody has experience with these tools that goes back more than 18 to 24 months. And so if you reset the playing field and put everybody at the starting line and say, go, what does that mean for career progression, for the ability to create your own vehicle or company or aesthetic or sound? Like that is an extremely leveling playing field. Transformation sweeping through. Think about in the early 2000s when pen and paper and fax machines and things like that got replaced with the Microsoft Office suite, where that there were companies that stayed behind and resisted, and those that adopted the first wave of digital transformation. And you still see some of the the stalwarts of the restaurants that write everything down on a napkin or a pad,
Those
or
are
they run your credit card with the manual thing. Like there are still some that hold on to those old ideals of tacticality and paper, and I love those for the niche that they are, especially if they're a cocktail bar that serves mai tais. Um, and then we saw another wave of transformation in 2010, 2015 with the progression to the cloud. I still work with people who don't trust it, who need to see the file on the desktop to know that the data is there. Either they got burned, or the same issues that we have with AI, they felt that way about, quote, cloud, and that they didn't trust the privacy or the transparency aspect of it because it wasn't mature. But now today, that's that's now commonplace. Even ask the IT departments of on-prem versus hosted solutions. It's no question. We're not running emails on closet servers much anymore. It's something that we now have sort of accepted as common truth. And I think that we're in this third wave of transformation with regards to the tool sets in which we're using, how we apply them, the same issues of trust and privacy, and all of those kind of hesitations of adoption, as we should be considering them, including climate and ethics and attribution. But it's interesting to see some go full steam all in, and others sort of pull back and try to understand what it all means.
Yeah, and I think the right balance is somewhere kind of in the middle because if you hang your hat on a technology that, as you said, I mean, AI has been around for probably 15 or 20 years, but only really in the commonplace in the commonplace of society for about 2 years, like you said.
Hmm.
If you build if you build a business completely around that, it's kind of like the .com bubble and everything else that we saw gradually increase. And then the bottom fell out of it because you put all your eggs into that basket rather than part of it.
We were doing projects on natural language processing, machine learning, language models, sentiment and tone, context and hierarchy. We had been spinning up these same libraries in their infancy that are now getting thrown into this jumbled box we're calling AI. And if you notice my language, I'm very hesitant to use that. To me, AI was a medium average Steven Spielberg movie,
Yeah.
which I didn't quite understand. Um, I, Haley Joel Osment, I forgot who the little kid was, but it's now a trigger word. We're seeing partially with divisions in society and perceptions of big tech and their reach or overreach. We're seeing that use of AI, even as a noun, being something that is can be very triggering to people. Either you're for or against, or you're in or you're out. And so I'm very careful of how I use that blanket statement because it could mean a lot of things. The first instance of AI commercially that I saw was a little chat bot that allowed you to query a language model that was a company's documentation and support database. And so that was a way of call and response. And then it gained and gained and gained from there. And so I'm just hesitant to attribute all sort of I guess the sort of insights or algorithmic driven insights as this blanket AI. It seems too ubiquitous, generalized of a bucket to apply to our use of technology.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, I would agree with all of that. And I think we've had a really interesting and intellectual conversation, and we need to lighten the mood a little bit for
Yep.
the audience.
Let's take it over to OnlyFans.
No,
What,
I
what,
don't know about that.
oh,
but
Patreon. Sorry. Am
but
I
you
getting?
did well, we've still got some time and I've got a few more questions for you.
Okay, great.
So, I understand that there's a story that I was given or that I was told to ask you about
Hmm.
with doing the squiggle.
Who told you to ask this story? Was it I, or was it an algorithm? I often get hosts that ask a GPT, which question should I ask him? And you can tell because the host is just sort of reading from the script, doesn't pause to go into further sort of like vulnerabilities or emotional areas, which just goes through. Was this an algorithm? Did Walmart tell you, Trevor?
This was somebody from your company who
Oh,
told me to
oh,
ask you
this
this
probably
because
probably was me.
when I when I prepare for interviews, I do use large language model tools,
Yes.
but I focus the conversation around the information that has been provided to me
Yes.
or that I find on your LinkedIn specifically, because if I go Google you,
Mm.
I'm sure I'll find all kinds of things, but typically that might end up being something you don't want to talk about.
I'd love to talk about the squiggle. I'm not
Please.
sure. Let's see. How do I protect myself legally from this? Let's
You're
not.
amongst friends.
Yeah, let's not mention the employer. But the squiggle is a large, big box retailer. It's an element of their brand. And we went to the brand's headquarters. And one of the things you do as an outside consultant is at your morning stand up, and you are all, these are the back days when we had people in place at the offices. You would do the give me a is 7 letters to describe the company's name, and in the middle is this asterisk shaped symbol, which they called the squiggle. And so you sort of did the fact domino, the twist. Um, but this was the wonderful part about being a consultant, is that you got to see the inside of a lot of these companies. Now, unfortunately, what we were brought on to do was build their intranet for the largest employer in the United States at the time. Um, and it was also a very anti-union company, probably still is today. And when you have employees wanting to talk with one another, as an intranet should encourage, that UX was hard to grok from a corporate standpoint. They didn't want to encourage connection. It instead was about messaging. And so the squiggle turned into a squabble. And it was a little bit difficult of a project, but there was good barbecue at the headquarters over there. And so that's the plus side of the whole thing. I'm not sure if that answered whatever
Well,
question this was, but
you just gave me flashbacks to when I was doing undergrad work
yes.
because I worked for a large retailer, and whenever I would work opening shift in the morning before the store opened, we would all get together in front of the store. The store manager or whoever the floor manager is would be up there with this clipboard talking
Mhm.
about numbers that nobody cared about.
Yep.
And then we'd do a cheer before we opened, and then we'd be clapping for all the customers as they walked in. And it was the most uncomfortable thing for everybody involved because later on when I became a customer at that store, just
Mhm.
a customer, and I would get there early to get in and get out. And then I would watch and I'd see them doing their cheer and then they'd be
Mhm.
clapping for me as I'm walking in. I'm like, I'm just walking in to buy something.
Yeah.
Go. Don't you have to be somewhere?
Yeah. As a PM, can you appreciate the vibe that sort of set? You were kind of bringing that in.
No, I can't.
No, no.
I appreciate the fact that it was an uncomfortable position
Mhm.
for most of the staff that didn't care. Because unless you're a manager, you don't care about what the numbers are in the store if you're an hourly employee.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
If you're on commission, you care about your numbers, but you don't care about the store's numbers.
It's very Japanese, the fighting spirit and the calisthenics before work,
Yep.
or the cheers and the song. Uh, one of the we talk about UX. I'll try to keep this focused on the practice rather than the person. Um, Employee experience is a way of service design as we start to look at what employee goes through at every step along the way. One of the challenges that we saw with these big box retailers who shall remain nameless other than the squiggle in the fourth character of their logo, um, was that a lot of the times the shifts that they worked were so haphazard. There was a downward pressure of trying to keep employees not working more than 24 hours, lest they kick into full time benefits and things like that. And so you'd have to do graveyard. And then on Tuesday, you would have to do opening. And then you would have to sort of mix and match your schedule. And the idea was that there was this big scheduling widget at the top of the intranet, which was perfect because that's why they came to the intranet, was to find their schedule. But what I proposed was a lot of these people working at this big box retailer with the squiggle as the fourth character, didn't have broadband, and this was again mid 2000s. They didn't have high bandwidth connections or browser screens that could show image rich and content heavy sites. They had dial up back then. And so, why not do a text service where you would text your employee ID number to a service and then it would text you back Tuesday 8 to 10, Wednesday 3 to 5, and it was just that raw information. That didn't fly because they needed to read the message from the CEO and the general manager, and they needed to download the
Yeah.
document and do the thing. But in
And
terms of like cutting out all the noise and getting them to the piece of information they wanted the most, you'd have to, and then instead you'd have to call the manager, you'd have to call the store, and the manager would sit there and says, "Well, Trevor, I know you're disgruntled, but you're coming in Tuesday 8 to 10 and Wednesday 5 to 3. Hope
at
you."
at this same job, I can't remember what day of the week it was that the schedule for the next week came out, but every day of that, whatever day of the week it was, everybody opened up the binder that was
Yep.
sitting underneath the register. They flipped to the one section where the schedule was, and everybody took out their rudimentary camera phones because this was back in 2002.
Yep.
Take a picture of the take a picture of the schedule, and then you would have it. Or if you didn't have a phone, which is more common back then, you would take it over to the copy machine, make a copy, and then you grab the highlighter, highlight your shifts in that calendar, fold it up, put it in your pocket, and then go about your day. And you did that every week.
Yeah. Transfer of information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
So,
I love those stories. It was the reason why UI became boring to me. I'm not, you introduced me as an intellectual, which I think is a leap. Um, I'm not cerebral enough to care about the visual impression of design, and that's it. I care more about those stories and experiences. And I imagine myself sitting behind the counter and watching employee after employee open the binder, do the thing, put the binder away. Here comes the next employee, open the binder, do the thing, because that to me, when presented to a room of executives who's going to figure out how are we going to design this intranet and what features and what platforms are we going to use, that to me is an advocate to say, no, let's just do a text service where that we have a real-time service that's able to give the people what they need. It's a
well,
better experience.
so every guest of mine, I think this segues perfectly into every guest gets a personalized, fun question. So your question, because you're the researcher, well, we won't say AI, you're the generative expert.
Yes, yes.
If you had to do a research paper on one of these two topics, which one would you choose and why?
Okay.
And the two topics are why cats are better than dogs or why pineapple is an appropriate topping on a pizza.
Trevor, I'm glad you asked me this question because just yesterday I had pineapple on my pizza and I had to justify to the person that I was sharing the pizza with why I chose pineapple. So that's an easy answer. And you can have this full transcript on Trevor Greenberg's OnlyFans page. You'll just have to pay a small $5 a month. Giant.
No OnlyFans, no
Oh,
OnlyFans. There's a
I
Patreon.
I keep getting the paywall wrong. I'm sorry. All right. Let me go
That's
to
a
the
totally
pineapple.
different type of paywall that I'm not a part of.
Pineapple helps break the enzymes down in cheese. For those of us who are slightly lactose intolerant, I say slightly because my wife won't share a bed with me if I eat pizza or ice cream earlier in the evening. Do you know what I'm saying? I find it entertaining and charming. She finds it toxic
Repulsive?
and noxious. Yeah. But if you have pineapple on your pizza, it breaks down the enzymes in the cheese and helps it digest better. So easy, notwithstanding. I don't quite like the ham accompaniment. I prefer pineapple and pepperoni or pineapple and bacon. I do want to, I think the ham's a little flat. It could be spicier. It's a spicy pizza. And so, yes, I will answer your second question with a plume and say pineapple is perfectly acceptable. Sweet and spicy on the same slicey. That's great.
So there you have it. The scientific reason why pineapple is an appropriate pizza topping.
Mhm.
And if you disagree, you are wrong.
Yeah.
Scientifically speaking, of course.
No question about it. I fart in your general direction if you disagree.
So, Nick, why don't you
Hmm.
tell the audience where they can find you, where they can engage with you, find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah. if you are a designer or work in a design adjacent field, I have created a assessment survey. Again, this stems back from the story I told earlier. If you've made it this far into the podcast, where there was a design department that got circumvented by somebody who was using generative tools, and they were stuck doing the traditional Figma design software route. And these are my people. I have come from this stock. And have empathy for those that might be stuck behind organizational challenges or data challenges or whatever it might be. And you can find that survey at retrain, RETRAIN .gauge.io. And Trevor will be good enough to put it in the
It'll
show
be
notes.
in the show notes.
Retrain.gauge.io, and it's a free assessment service. It'll compare you against those within your industry, against those within similar organization, team size, and give you some dimensions of assessment for maybe we are ahead of the curve or behind the curve in our assessment of generative tools in a design workflow process. But other than that, I'd love to meet you on LinkedIn and find out about your Patreon. Yeah, let's start the conversation and see how I can help you.
Yeah, and you still haven't even accepted my connection request yet.
Haven't? Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that. I have a team of monkeys furiously clicking away, approving every request that comes in. They must have taken
So,
a break.
so, that's I think that's a great place to end this episode. And then we'll pick it up more on the Patreon in the postmortem interviews where I'm really going to be probing Nick for some of his strategies, some of his techniques, his maybe even share some prompts with us. So with that, like and follow and subscribe to all the platforms and engage with Nick on his platforms. Uh, with that, I'll end like I always do with may your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Nick Cawthon, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM.